Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Yolanda Bonadona. I am the VP of Programming for our ICF South Florida chapter. Today, our webinar is going to be the art and science of coaching. And we have the fortune to have Lyssa back with us this year. She's been with us in August, and now she came back to talk to us about the new competencies. So we will be looking at the old competencies and linking them to the updated competencies. And I think that's very timely as ICF is publishing the new PCC markers. So this is going to be a great introduction to that. Thank you very much, Lyssa, for being with us. Lyssa is an MCC. She has written a book, and I need to look at my notes to tell you about the name of the book.
Oh, here it is. I've got a copy handy enough.
Great. Great. So you'll show it to us. It's a story jacking, change your dialogue.
So it's really about these internal narratives that we have and how if we can start to challenge them, we might change our lives. Right,
and Lyssa is also an ICF certified mentor coach and coaching educator who works with professional coaches to deepen their confidence with mastery. Please help me welcome Lyssa deHart.
Hi, it's Lyssa, and I'm so happy to be with you guys again. This is going to be fun. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to have a demonstration later in the call. And so what I will definitely be doing is at that time, maybe enough of the people will have shown up and I'll drop into the chat box, the document, the new updated document, because as Yolanda mentioned, the new competency PCC markers are out as of this week. And so for those of you who are looking at moving towards PCC or even towards MCC, because even MCCs still hold the competencies, they just do it slightly different, but they're still utilizing the same competencies. So what we're going to take a look at today is we're going to take a look at the updated core competencies, a bit of the neuroscience of how the competencies support coaching and the neuroscience of coaching, as well as a coaching demo, and looking at how we're listening deeply and growing our coaching mindset, which is the new competency that they have added to the core competencies. Before I dive too deeply into it, though, I would love to get a sense from people to please bring yourself off mute if you would like to, but I'd love to get a sense of what brought you here today. I would love to have a sense of that. And there's no wrong answer, so you don't need to be shy about it. Just, like what sparked your interest?
Hi, Lyssa. My name's Suzanne, and I have put off getting my ICF certification for 15 years since I was first trained at NYU, and I'm considering doing it. So that's what brought me here.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that is quite a stretch of time to put something off. I applaud you for that.
Thanks.
You're super welcome. What else? What about other folks here?
It's always great to see someone coaching, especially MCC, and seeing the demo. I think there is nothing like this. So I've had it in my school when I went to, and it was phenomenal. That I've learned much more about markers from seeing it in action rather than, learning about it in theory. So that's definitely going to be very interesting and exciting.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Anybody else? What brought you here? One more person.
Hi, Lyssa. Pedro here. So I will say the same, just to learn from you and to see an MCC coaching, and I think it's a great opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, and I do want to be completely transparent here. MCC does not mean perfect coaching, okay? Any more than PCC means perfect credentialed coaching. It's really, again, it's that dance of a conversation, and that really takes both people, the client and the coach, to both show up, into the space together. And so we'll see what happens in the demonstration. It might be one of those things where you're like, I learned what I don't want to do. And that's, quite frankly, just as important as going, oh, I'm totally stealing that. So I just want to set the transparency really clearly about, just you're having a real conversation with another human being. Who knows where it goes, right? Who knows where it goes in that moment?
Thank you.
So, and I'm also seeing, getting familiar with the new changes to decide whether I take the assessment now or later, and seeing the coaching. Yeah, and there is no perfection. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen real quick. Thank you guys for letting me know what was bringing you here. So for me, I really see this as an idea of masterfulness that we're moving towards. So every masterful coach starts off in a beginner's mind, and those who continue to grow stay in that beginner's mind the whole of their lives. And that is really a value and a belief that I have about just the whole process of coaching. I got my ACC. So I got my original coach training in 2008, and I came to coaching from the background of being a therapist. And so I did have a bias that said, I don't really need this coach training. It's kind of like, I already know all this, right? So it was really interesting as I took my coach training in 2008, though, how I started to incorporate the competencies into my just all of my conversations. And then in 2013, I had an opportunity to move up to the Pacific Northwest. And so at that time, I shut down my private practice and thought, I don't want to be a therapist anymore. I really think it's time to explore coaching more deeply. And so what happened was I had plenty of hours for my PCC at that time, and I had enough training hours, but what I didn't have was confidence to just apply for my PCC. So what I did was in 2014 was apply for my ACC. I got my ACC, and then I continued taking coursework and classes to really start to hone in on the competencies and how to utilize them. And in 2016, I applied for my PCC because by then I'd had a couple of years of playing around with these competencies, and I was feeling much more confident in my capacity to utilize the competencies within a conversation. And then at the beginning of 2018, I found out that there was going to be a change in the way that they allowed people to apply for their MCC. And they were, until July 31st, allowing you to use hours for your MCC that you had accrued prior to coach training. And so only for MCCs, but I was like, holy cow, like I've got all these hours accrued prior to 2008. If I don't throw this Hail Mary pass, I am going to really kick myself in the behind. So I decided I would go ahead and really dive hard into my MCC. And so I was getting a lot of mentor coaching at that point, and I was doing a lot of one-on-one mentor coaching and really starting to break down my own conversations, get really, I don't mean critical in a negative way, but critical in a really curious way about what the client offered me, and then what was my question and where did that fit within the competencies. And so in 2018, I applied for my MCC, and I was lucky and got it the first time I applied. So I was really, that was like, yay. And I really throw this out here also because I was just having this conversation with another coach. it wasn't that both of my demonstrations were absolutely perfect demonstrations of like the most pristine coaching, but what they did was they hit enough of the markers high enough to pass. So both passed, even though in one area I hadn't created as strong of an agreement setting in the conversation as they felt I could have. And then there was another, there were some other places where they felt like I maybe wasn't as fully, my presence wasn't showing up as strongly as they were hoping that it would to demonstrate at the MCC level. So it was quite an interesting exploration. And it doesn't, as you're going for your PCC or you're going for your ACC, it isn't that you have to be a perfect coach. Okay. I really want to throw that out there because I think sometimes we get this idea of I must do it perfect. And especially if we're having to record a conversation to submit, I think our perfectionism can get triggered. And one of my biggest takeaways in my own process has been perfection just kills presence, right? This idea that I have to perform kills presence. And so allowing yourself to really get comfortable with the competencies so that you have them in your bones a bit, so then you can play with them so that you're fully showing up, because that's what you want ultimately, right? Is to have a real conversation with another human being and demonstrate that. The competencies will show up as a result of how you ask your questions. So that said, the competencies took a bit of a shift late last year. These came out, I believe, they weren't there. The new competencies will be in full effect starting January 2021. So this coming up quickly, which is why Yolanda was like, hey, we should do this, towards the end in the fall or late summer, fall for our group, because the competencies will be in place starting in January, but most coaching schools are already starting to utilize them, and they just came out with the new PCC markers for the new competencies. So you can see how what we had before was ethical guidelines, right? And it's shifted, just the language has shifted a bit, ethical practice. There's a new competency that has been added, which is embodies a coaching mindset. And so this is a completely new competency that didn't exist before. Establishing the coaching agreement is really becoming establishing and maintaining the agreements. Establishing trust and intimacy is shifted into cultivates trust and safety. Coaching presence has morphed into maintains presence. Active listening is morphed into listening actively. And then there's the three competencies of powerful questioning, direct communication, and creating awareness, which has been really streamlined into evokes awareness. And within that, you've got powerful questioning. Within that, you have direct communication, and you also have the awareness piece. And then the same thing happened with the final new competency, which is facilitates client growth. When you were being assessed for PCC markers, they were already clumping 9, 10, and 11 together around designing actions, planning and goal setting, progress, and accountability. So they've just made that more formal into facilitates client growth. What do you notice what do you notice as you look at the shift to the updated competencies? What comes up for folks?
One thing that I notice is that a lot of it's about, before a lot of it was about establishing it, and now it seems like it's an emphasis on, yes, you need to establish it, but make sure you're continuing to maintain it. And
yes. Yeah, you're cultivating and maintaining, right? Yeah. What else?
It also seems like they made them more streamlined.
Yes.
And easier to follow and easier to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree with you. I think it is much more streamlined. And I think I'm wondering if I have it right here. Hold on, because I may share a different part of my screen. But I also like the language shifts, like cultivates trust and safety versus establishing trust and intimacy. I think for a lot of people, I don't know, maybe somebody on this call, but the word intimacy has often shown up as sort of a problematic word when you're thinking about executive and business coaching, even in life coaching, right? Like, what does intimacy mean? And I mean, I personally don't see it as an appropriate kind of intimacy, but I think the use of trust and safety is much more in alignment for a lot of people about what we're doing here. And we can be thinking about things like psychological safety, right? Versus intimacy, which is maybe, I don't know what it means to other people. Sort of what comes up for me in my mind is more about like that we can have a conversation about any deep issue, but it is kind of it's a kind of a loaded word, right? Whereas trust and safety are just, to Meredith, I believe you said, more streamlined. They're more to the point, more concise. What else are you guys noticing?
I like number 7, like evokes awareness. Because the other 3, the old 3 ones are pretty redundant. One and the other, I mean, that's what the 3 of them that do evoke awareness. So I like the way that was combined into one.
Yeah. And it really just sums it up nicely, right? It's like, that's kind of the job that we have as a coach, is to work within that space of evoking awareness. And we're going to use our curiosity to ask powerful questions, to communicate, direct communication, and to create awareness by inviting the client to name things and to explore things. So I like that language also, and the simplification of it. I also like this one. I don't know why, and maybe somebody else will have an explanation for this. I don't know that I have, but I like the shift from active listening to listens actively. I don't know why that makes a difference to me, but it does. There's something about listening actively that is different than active listening. Because for me, active listening often meant I'm regurgitating back what I think I've heard you say. Right. And I think there's a place for saying something to the effect of, so if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm hearing da 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 da. But I think listens actively is more that I'm really paying attention to listening on multiple different levels, right? I'm listening actively below the waterline, so to speak. And so one of the things that I think about, so everybody, are we all familiar with the iceberg theory? Everybody's seen the iceberg theory. So, and we know that actions are right here. We see these behaviors and those lead to outcomes, right? So we have actions lead to outcomes. But what we often don't pay attention to are the things that are below the waterline, right? And those are the things that drive the behaviors that lead to the actions, or the outcomes rather. So if we're not getting curious below the waterline and evoking awareness by asking questions about, saying something directly like, client, do you mind me holding something up that I'm noticing? Like, I'm seeing this pattern week to week to week that we're working, and I'm curious about that. I don't need to know what it means, but my willingness to listen actively in the sense of noticing something and paying attention to the words that people are using. I often listen for metaphors, very, really consciously listening for metaphors that I think might be important to the client. They sound like really powerful metaphors. Or what we're doing is we're listening for shifts of energy or tone of voice, right? If you've ever had the client who's telling you, yeah, I need to stay at my job, but I don't know, right? and you're like, you can just hear it in their voice right there. It's like, what just happened? Like you almost are like a deflating balloon as you're talking. What is that, right? And the client then makes meaning out of it. And that's a big part of the competencies also, is to really see your client as whole, capable, resourceful, right? That we're seeing them as whole human beings. And that's a big part of the competency too, which is a coaching mindset, which is that we see our clients as capable, which means that we're constantly turning it back over to the client to make meaning versus us making meaning for them, right? So those are some things to think about. So I've said a bunch. I'm just curious if there's any questions that are showing up yet.
You know, the one that I don't think puts them together as nicely as the evokes awareness is the next one, number 8, facilitates client growth, and where you have designing actions and planning and progress and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as clear to me that with the facilitates client growth would bring all those 3 things together.
Yeah, so that's where it becomes really important to begin to look at the mark, or not even just what the markers say, but what the actual competencies themselves are saying are indicators of that. And so let me just I'm going to just stop sharing for just 1 second, because that becomes a really important piece of awareness, right? So I'm going to put in here right now a checklist for you guys, but what it has is the PCC markers. That the new updated ones are in this. So can everybody see that? You can double click on that and download it. So when we go down to the bottom one of cultivates learning and growth, and which is the cluster for competency 8, facilitates client growth, we have a definition, which is, and I'll just share mine really quickly so we're all looking at the same thing, but we have a definition which is partners with the client to transform learning and insight into action, promotes client autonomy in the coaching process. Now, there are different indicators that go under that. So if you look at the competency itself, it is broken down differently, but these are the PCC markers that they're going to be listening for in your coaching demonstrations, which is inviting the client to explore what progress towards their, what they want to accomplish in the session. That happens at the very beginning, right? That might not happen at the very end. Inviting them to state what their learning is about themselves that has come out of the session, about their learning about their situation, because what we're not doing is we're coaching the client's relationship to the situation, not trying to solve the situation itself, right? Inviting the client to consider how they'll use this learning in from the coaching session that they've just had, partnering with them to design post-session reflections, actions, or thinking. They've really opened that up, because I think for a lot of people, the idea of actions had to be something like, I don't know, call 12 people in the next week to network or something like that. Like that's a pretty obvious action. But an action can also be things like, I'm going to just really sit with this insight that I've had, and maybe I'm going to journal about it, or maybe I'm going to talk to my clients about what they're noticing in regard to this, depending on what the situation is. So it's not just an action that's a specific thing. It could be an action that is more ephemeral, like I'm going to journal, or I'm going to process, or I'm going to sit with this idea that came up today and just see how it fits for me. Partners with the client to consider how they want to move forward, including resources, supports, and potential barriers that might get in the way of them doing what they say is important to them. celebrating progress and learning, and then also with how the client would like to complete the session. That might show up in some different ways. And it invites you to ask the client, is there anything else that you need to be complete for this conversation? And they say one more thing or no, right? So it puts them at choice again on how they want to complete their own session. So Yolanda, when you look at the sort of the breakdown of those ideas for facilitating growth and facilitating client growth, what comes up for you then?
There might be many ways of doing that are not the specific 9, 10, and 11. I think they are all good, but you can facilitate the client growth in many other different ways. So I don't think it expresses it brings together those other three. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And you can interpret it differently, but you say we have the markers and the behaviors to see what they mean specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And a big part of, facilitating client growth is, what is the client's goal? What if they had a conversation about in this coaching session, what is their goal, not just for that session, because there's the agreement that is our overarching goal that we have for the work that we're doing with the client. So for instance, maybe it is building confidence. I don't know, I'm just making something up, right? Building confidence. And that's their overarching goal. And we've come up with a really juicy goal for that. And then the client, the individual session may have a goal also that is the goal for that conversation. Like, what would you like to have by the time you leave here today regarding the topic that you brought forward? So if I'm working on confidence, but what's happened is I'm bringing to the conversation today, I had this really difficult conversation with a coworker, and I'm like feeling really kind of like, I feel like I need to say something, but I don't feel confident to say something. Then the conversation that we're having in that session may be about what's showing up for them in that moment, as it relates to their larger goal also, right? Sometimes clients will come to you and be like, this has nothing to do with my goal, but I need to talk about this today, right? They do that also. And I've even had a few clients who have come to me a couple of times and been like, I need to just speak and do not say anything. Don't ask me any questions. I need to just dump all this. And I'm like, okay, go ahead. Right? Because it's their session. And so we're going to show up the way they need us to show up. And that's going to be a part of it also. And to some degree, I would even say, to your point, Yolanda, there's a lot of ways that we support client growth and facilitate client growth. For me, if a client feels empowered to say to me, I need this next 20 minutes to be me only speaking and you not ask questions, that is huge. That's a huge empowerment that they felt confident enough to ask that of someone. How many times do we feel confident enough to say to somebody, I need a lot less of this and a lot more of that right now, right? Not very often. And so that is building confidence. It is supporting that client growth towards what allowed you to create the boundaries so clearly with me in this session that might be also moving towards their greater overarching goal of confidence, right? So interesting. There's so many ways to play with it, right? Those just what I like.
And it's on the client's terms that you will facilitate. What facilitates me may not facilitate you. So it's
exactly. And so that's why it's so important to ask the client, because they're the only ones who will absolutely know what it is that is going to be useful to them for their own personal growth. So one of the things that I think is really important when you're thinking about the competencies is that I see the competencies as the container of a coaching conversation. So there's a piece of facilitation at the beginning where we're asking about agreement setting. We're getting to what is the more, like, what's driving this? What's bringing this up for you right now? And then we're also connecting to an outcome, where the client wants to be by the end of our time together. What would make this a useful or successful powerful conversation for them, right? And so what we've done in that moment is we're really getting a container. We know what the topic is, but even more importantly, we know what's important about the topic. How many times have you guys had a client come and say, my topic today is I'm really annoyed or I don't like my job. I don't know, with something, right? Like they brought some topic and it's a surface level topic. And maybe they're like, I don't like a coworker that I have. And so like, what's really driving that? Right? Well, I don't feel like I have enough control at work, or I feel like I'm being bossed around, or this person is being disrespectful to me in some way. That's a much more important, juicy topic than this coworker who none of us have any control over, right? But this client's experience, like, is this familiar to you? Is this a pattern that you've noticed? Where are the places where this is showing up other than at work? Right? Those might be important conversations to have about what's really driving this. And once we have that container set and we know what is important and where the client wants to be by the end of the conversation, it gives us all this room in the middle. I really call it the sandbox, right? Where we can just play in the sand and be curious with each other to find out to help evoke awareness. And evoking awareness and powerful questioning is not about complicated questions. It's also not about being super provocative or evocative with the client. It's just about like helping them. What are you noticing as you hear yourself say that? That might be a question that invites the client to be curious on their own behalf. Where have you seen this show up for you in other places in your life? Where are places in your life where you've handled this beautifully and you felt really good about how that went? Where are places where you notice maybe you've struggled with it a bit more? What do you learn between those two? What does that tell you when you look at these two different places within your life? Right? And so what we're doing then is we're really doing a lot of deep listening. What do those words mean that you're using? What's happening there with that shift of energy? Or I saw you really light up as you said that. What just happened there? Right? I remember having a conversation with a client, and it was hilarious because I asked her a question and she just made this face like, and I was like, uh-oh, I wonder what just happened there. So I said, what just happened there? Your face, you made this face. What does that mean? And she goes, that's the face I make when something blows my mind. So like, I would never have guessed that if I hadn't just asked it, right? Because it was only through my curiosity of what just happened there that she was like, she was making a connection. And then we could anchor it, because it's a little like if a tree falls in a forest. I looked outside because I live in a forest. If a tree falls in a forest and nobody's there to hear it, did it make a sound, right? And so a lot of times our clients will bring forward an awareness or an insight. It's an opportunity to hear it so that it doesn't just fall away and they miss this opportunity of insight that they brought forward themselves. Okay, I'm going to go back to my slides. So I want to talk a little bit about the neuroscience of coaching. So there's some really interesting research that came out of Case Western University with Richard Boyatzis and Anthony Jack. And one of the things that they found was for a lot of, so what they did, they just in a nutshell, they did an experiment, and the experiment worked like this. They had two different kinds of coaches. They had a coach that was going to really be focused on the positive emotions and things that they were noticing and really focusing on the positive things that the client was bringing forward. And then they had a coach that was going to be much more asking questions that were geared towards what the client hadn't done versus what they were doing. right? So they had this sort of positive emotional attractor versus a negative emotional attractor. And what they did was they then took all of these college students and they put them through these coaching experiences with each of the coaches, one doing this positive emotional attractor and one doing this negative emotional attractor. And what they found was that the college students liked all the coaching. They were very appreciative of all the coaching. But what they discovered was that in the coaching itself, that the positive emotional attractor, or the P, demonstrated a greater engagement of the brain regions associated with motivation. Whereas the negative emotional attractors engaged the sympathetic stress response, and people were left feeling judged and a bit more self-conscious, like I wasn't doing it right. So when you hear that and you're thinking about that, I want you to consider, because a lot of us end up focusing on what isn't working, and we get into a spiral around a situation that we don't have any power to resolve. And what ends up happening is we're asking questions like, why are you allowing that? And like, what's keeping you held there? And like, why are you stuck? And what ends up happening is that we're doing it for a good reason, because we really want to support our clients. But the problem is that ultimately it shuts down their frontal lobes, because they're feeling judged for not doing it right. And so their creativity and that capacity to be creative and think of new ways of doing whatever it is that needs to happen gets shut down. And it's very much akin to the way that our brains just typically work, right? Where if we have a stress response to something, right? We're pretty familiar with this. We're going to have the release of cortisol and norepinephrine and like adrenaline and these different chemicals and hormones that are going to really start going, oh no. And as a result of that, the capacity for us to think with our prefrontal lobe is going to be very diminished. So thinking about, just from a neuroscience perspective, when we go back over here to the competencies, establishing and maintaining agreements, really understanding what's important to your client, having them direct the conversation, telling us what they want to explore, us asking deeper questions about what's important about that, and then also where would they like to go by the conclusion of our conversation, sets this stage of that client being in charge. Cultivating trust and safety. I visualize this myself very much in this way. I see myself as sort of a blind person being led through a conversation. And so I lightly have my hand on the shoulder of my client and I'm asking them questions. What is it that you're what is it that you're noticing right here? I'm feeling like the ground is a little spongy right here. What are you noticing? Right? But I'm always asking, and I'm not assuming. And one of the things that happens as a result of that is I'm not telling the client what they think or know or can or can't do. I'm asking them what they're noticing, what they're experiencing. And so therefore there's a lack of judgment that shows up. I'm not deciding good or bad, right or wrong. I'm just being curious with them, right? And they're leading me through their emotional landscape. So I just want to stop there real quick and just sort of touch base with you guys. What's coming up for you as we're talking about the competencies and also this idea of looking for the positive emotional attractor kinds of questions? Yes.
Well, I can tell you that as a crisis counselor, the positive works way better than the negative. In fact, I would never use a negative emotional attractor if that was the right thing.
Yeah.
It's so detrimental to someone who's in a crisis or even just wants some empathy. And the positive, they don't always get there. It takes time, but if you use a negative attractor, you're going to get some immediate feedback and it's not going to go well. Yeah. So yeah, it makes perfect sense that you would use this same methodology with people who are not necessarily in crisis.
Right, because our brains still work the same, right? And I think, for me, it's a really interesting thing where I can ask a question, and it's a funny thing. Like, here's a sort of a simple example of it. I'm noticing that you seem like you feel much more empowered. Like, that sounds like a nice thing, doesn't it? And yet what I'm doing is I'm telling the client their own feelings. So it has a deep negative, distancing of trust. Like, they may be feeling more empowered, but being told that they're feeling more empowered does something to us, right? Whereas if I say to them, man, your energy is really shifting, what are you noticing for yourself? The client's going to be like, I'm feeling so much more empowered. Now that's theirs. They own it. Their brain lit up for that, versus this sense of, I'm slightly feeling a little stressed and maybe threatened because somebody's telling me how I feel. I don't know about anybody in this space, but I know how I feel when people tell me how I feel. You're really angry right now. You're really annoyed. You're really this. It's usually a negative thing that they're also doing. But even if they're telling me that I feel empowered, it can have a little bit of a like, maybe I am and maybe I'm not. Like, it can kind of set up a red flag for us. And so that can just be even a simple example of something well-intentioned that may have a negative response for somebody. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up also, Jimmy, about, it shuts down our brain, and if we're in crisis, even faster. So I'm looking at the time, and I want to do a coaching demonstration, and I need a volunteer. And I'm curious if anybody has something that they would like to do a little bit of coaching on. It's not going to be a super long coaching demonstration, somewhere between 20 to 25 minutes of coaching. So it's not like your apex issue that you ever have wanted to get coaching on. But, something that you'd like to explore. Anybody have a topic that they would like to get some coaching on? Nina, yay! I always love it when somebody volunteers.
I would be happy to explore one thing.
Excellent. So here's what I'm going to ask everybody is I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves and to go off camera, to not just close your, don't just do this, actually turn off, stop your video so that it can just be Nina and I, because I am going to hide non-video participants so that the only person that I see is you, Nina. And then also I had put into the chat the coaching demonstration competency worksheet checklist. And so what I'd invite you guys to do is make sure you've downloaded that, and I'll put it in again real quickly. Hold on a second. And then that way, if you just arrived, you can download it. But these are things to be paying attention to in the coaching demonstration itself. So Nina, thank you so much for being willing to play with me today. Before we get going, is there anything that you need to sort of pull the curtains down and have that sense of it's just you and I in this conversation and we're not being...
I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. So thank you for being brave and being willing to be my partner today. What is showing up for you as something you would like to get a little coaching around?
Thank you for choosing me. I'm honored. I would like to get a coaching around one of the blocks that I'm experiencing around me being able to fluently write and be visible in a different language, meaning in English actually, versus my native language, which is not English. So I am now working as developing my own business, my own coaching business, and I do find that it's necessary for me to become more visible. So I'm doing like articles on LinkedIn and talking, not so much as I would like to. And
what is, I
yeah.
think I heard you say that you're experiencing a block in writing because of the English to your native language. It's different. What is driving the block for you? What is below that?
Sorry, say it again. What is the block? What is defining the block?
What is the block? Yeah.
Well, I have several educations, and one of my first education is actually teacher of literature and language. That's my fundamental education in my native language. So when I am doing any of the writing in English, I kind of look at that. And now the English used to be my business language. So I am pretty fluent in English, but that's the language of, my business education and the language that I used to use in, talking with the clients and within a business environment. And it sounds to me as a very formal. So when I am I can write a legal contract in English. I have no problem with that. Okay? So it's not so much about grammar or something, but when I am thinking about putting an article, for example, not so much about the business, but more about coaching and, being more human.
So
I read my text and I see the contract, the legal contract there. Okay, that's my struggle.
So I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I'm hearing is that there's this sense of there isn't the creativity and your essence showing up in your writing the same way in English as it does in other ways that you write.
It's definitely not. Yeah. Well, at least that's how I see it. Okay. Yeah.
So if that creativity could really show up for you, what would you be sounding like?
I would be sounding like somebody who has a very rich language in terms of nuances, and somebody who can twist, like use the humor, and more of a metaphors and more of a stories that are not strictly kind of business stories, but more about feelings, what we see, what we feel, emotions involving these things that are not really, kind of outside the business.
Yeah. I'm almost hearing like the business language is somewhat cold, and the experience.
It's dry. Yeah. Yeah.
And what I'm experiencing as you're talking is this sense of warmth, right? That you would sound like somebody who has this capacity to be in nuances and humor and stories and feeling. It sounds like a warmth, right? That is showing up. What would be useful then today? And is that accurate? Is that accurate that it would be moving from this sort of more cold type of business writing to this more warm sort of personal writing?
Yeah. True. Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah.
So what would be useful then in our conversation today that would support you in this movement from this more cold business writing towards this more rich, nuanced, humorous storytelling?
I don't know. I wish I know. I don't know.
I love the laughter
I've
on
been
your face,
working.
though.
Yeah, I've been working on that for a while, and I just, I just read what I wrote, and I'm like, oh, I don't like it. I mean, I post it, but I see what I'm struggling with, but I can't find that, and that's, I don't know whether it's a language or or culture or anything else. I'm not actually sure. I mean, I see people who also are not the native speakers in English, you know, writing very differently than I do. So, I mean, it's definitely possible. I can see that it's possible, and that doesn't, necessarily involve better language knowledge. Let me put it like technically. Yeah.
Right.
So, I kind of sometimes I see, well, people still do some, mistakes, and the grammar is, you can say that, you can tell that they are not native speakers, but that comes out authentically and more genuinely than how I come up.
Is there somebody who you have read their work that really speaks to you of the messaging you want to share?
Well, there are several that come to mind. Yeah. For example, I am now reading Fred Kaufman, Conscious Business. And he's clearly not, he's from Argentina. So, and he, even like with an accent and everything, when he talks, it's, you can tell that he's not a native English speaker. But it comes whatever he writes and when he talks, it comes very naturally.
So what is it then? Hold on a second, because there's a couple questions that are really showing up for me. One is more of an observation. May I share a curiosity that's a bit of an observation?
Sure.
I'm wondering, I heard teacher of language, and I'm wondering, because listen, like your face right now is like just laughter and warmth and genuineness, right? I wonder, like, is there something that stops this from showing up when you're writing? That's in your own, like a story you're telling yourself about the way you're maybe supposed to be. I don't know.
Well, there's probably something of that, definitely, because, I am a perfectionist, of course. Recovering perfectionist, but still, yeah, there's definitely something of that. And it's also the comparison all the time, because I know how powerful I can be in my language. And I have a good experience there, and it's probably, I don't feel that being transferred into English. And that's my judgment, because I did ask many people for feedback in that sense, and everybody would say, no, it's fine. Like, we perfectly understand what you want to say, and it's all fine. So it's not that I had a lot of critics, for example, in that sense.
But I'm hearing that you have one critic.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would be possible for you if you could let go of that critical narrative about recovering perfect, right? What would be possible then?
That would be absolutely awesome. I mean, that would save me so much time, first of all, because I would spend much less time on doing the same thing that, like, going in circles about 5 paragraphs. And that would also, that would definitely move me forward.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually that would also help more people, because I'm very experienced kind of both coaching and business professional, and I'm holding many things because I think I can't.
I love that you caught yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're thinking, then, I mean, we've got about another 15 or so minutes left. What would be something that would be useful then to walk away with from today's conversation to help you with that moving forward?
Well, 2 things. One would probably be very useful to kind of get some reassurance,
Mm-hmm.
or find the way how I can get the reassurance that, it's really like I am my worst and best critic, and it's not so bad as I am thinking in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's probably is the main thing, because I mean, I know the steps, I know what I need to do, when I don't have it any longer, like that issue kind of thing.
Yeah. How do you give yourself reassurance that you know you're capable of learning to do what you need to do, because you know what you need to do, right? Like, how does that equation work for you between that seeing myself as capable and also this stretch into trusting myself to just be authentic in what I'm saying, even if it isn't perfect?
How do I see it? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's.
Not sure. Sorry. That's the that is kind of the area where I'm stuck a little bit, because I've been, going in circles there for a while.
If you were to step out of the circling, what would be one step that you could take that would take you out of the circling?
Kind of convincing myself that I don't need to be perfect.
What did you just hear yourself say?
Yeah. Yeah. The interesting thing, and I've been actually thinking about that also yesterday. This is why I jumped on as a volunteer. The interesting thing is that I didn't have that type of thing in the past. So I do have a history of like presenting in front of 500 people and, writing in the like business articles in the business, like in Wall Street Journal kind of thing, but in my country. And I never had any particular problem about that. So it's somehow that is like language connected, and I just can't figure out how to go over.
How do you support yourself to step out of a comfort zone? Because that's a little bit of what I think I hear, is that there's this comfort zone that you really had in your, that you have in your own language, but now you're inviting yourself to step out of that comfort zone and into a new language, right? How do you allow yourself to step out of the comfort zone?
Well, how do I allow myself? Well, I push myself out of the comfort zone all the time. like this today. So my principle is generally speak always when you can. Like even if you don't necessarily want to, just go, practice it whenever possible.
Mhm.
And all these things. So that's how I kind of do it. So probably repeating, to go back to the original question, what needs to be done to overcome it, probably just doing it repeatedly and kind of going over it, like, okay, whatever. And
Mhm.
when you do it 10 times, then probably it's less painful than, than the first time. Well, not probably, I know that it's less painful, right?
Yeah.
And then at some point, it's just like you just do it and you don't pay so much attention to that anymore. So that's.
How does that practice then build the reassurance and self-assuredness?
Yeah, that's definitely connected. Yeah, that's definitely like, direct connection there. Yeah, absolutely. Like the more you practice, the better you feel in whatever you practice. Yeah.
When
That's true.
you're doing things in your own language, and you're writing, how do you play with the laying out of what you're communicating, like the message or the story, or how do you use the metaphors? I mean, in the way that you write in your own language.
Well, they are kind of just coming, they are there, and that is the level of proficiency that I don't really have.
Yeah.
In English, and then also there is also a cultural kind of layer into that, because I'm gathering, for example, the proverbs from my English speaking colleagues on a day-to-day basis. They know that I have a book where I just write it down, and I'm like, okay, what exactly that means? Because sometimes they are the same, the notion is similar, and sometimes they're absolutely very, very different. And
What would
so
happen then if you played with bringing those from your own language into what you're communicating in English?
that's an interesting idea. That's for sure. That would be interesting to try to do that.
Because then you're not working so hard to find the humor and the metaphorical and the stories, right? You bring those from what you already know and make sense, right, for you. Yeah, what's happening there in your mind right now?
Well, the kind of that's a good idea, but here is the objection. That's what's happening in the mind. So my but is that that's kind of about me and not so much maybe about the client. So because I need the the audience to understand the idea of the metaphor. And sometimes my metaphors are not the, like the American audience metaphor, so to say.
So then I want to just bring us back to this idea of what you need to start to build reassurance for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Where are we with this reassurance and getting back to that sense of it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's enough, right?
Well, practice taking yourself out of the, pushing yourself out of the comfort zone, doing more of it, and practicing towards kind of getting in a lighter mood a little bit.
Yeah.
And
bringing that smile into it.
yeah, and allowing yourself, just kind of accepting that it is what it is, and it doesn't need to be perfect.
Yeah.
And then there are you gave me a few great ideas about, using how to kind of transfer the metaphor, that I'll need to think about that a little bit more.
Yeah. What are you walking away from our conversation with today? What are your takeaways?
Everything is possible. Everything is possible with the right mindset, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So then what strength or quality do you hold that you can support that mindset that makes it possible?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah. Well, my top quality, my top strength actually is perseverance. So that comes perfectly together with the practicing and kind of pushing yourself out of the comfort zone. So, yeah, I definitely can do that.
Yeah. Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. Is there
Thank you,
anything
Lyssa.
you need to just name or capture before we bring closure to this conversation?
No, I think we're good. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was
And
great.
I also want to throw this out here. If I always am so thankful for the courage of somebody to show up and be a client on a call like this. If you would email me and we can have a follow-up coaching conversation without an audience.
I will
Yeah. So you can get me at my email address, which is my name @gmail. And you can find me in any number of ways, but that offer is available to you should you like it.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Well, are we ready to invite these guys back? Thank you again, Nina. All right, so I am very curious to hear your observations, what you noticed, what you liked, what you were curious about, what you might have, a choice point you might have made that was different. You're not going to hurt my feelings. This isn't about what Nina was talking about, though. This is really fully about what you noticed in the coaching. So yeah, and she was so, I just always want to just acknowledge the people who will be clients in a situation with observers, because that's a big deal. It's a big darn deal. Anything showing up for folks? You guys are quiet.
I love your closing, Lyssa. The closing was, I love very many parts of it, but your closing was fantastic. I thought that was really, really worth probably for Nina too. It seemed to be like I'm taking something away that is valuable. I had, well, I'm just assuming that's what you think, but
You can
that
ask
was
her.
what I could get from it. Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah. And Nina, when you're ready, you're welcome to give your experience also, like share what you observed as a coach in the experience also. I got a request to repeat the closing. So remember, I talked about sort of the facilitation at the beginning around getting an agreement and finding out what was important. And what became sort of interesting in this conversation was we didn't immediately get to what was like the really deeper issue until pretty much kind of partway through, where that idea of perfection and sort of just show up, right? And at that point, I reestablished like, where are we going again? Did you guys notice that? Yeah. So you can check with the agreements when you're going, where are we now going? Now that we seem to have gotten to maybe the more important underlying issue, where would you like to go with that? And it doesn't have to be, it may have shown up in the very beginning, and then we kind of got curious and we're kind of trying different questions to see what would spark that deeper underlying curiosity. And then just reestablish it. You want clarity with the client that they're telling you where they would like to go with that information. Then we also had that idea of reassurance, right? That sense of reassurance. And so then it gave us a place that we were moving towards, and I could check in. How are we doing with that? I still need da. What would allow for that, right? Yeah. So Nina, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share?
No, not really. Was good.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like the closing. A few questions that you asked at the closing were kind of, very, very deeply wrapping the thing. So that was very good. Yeah, that was really good.
So I often will ask the client something to the effect of, what are you taking away from our conversation today?
Mhm.
Right? And then what are you going to do with what you're taking away? How will you support that or anchor that for yourself? How will you? And then there's the accountability piece also. What, in the way that I asked it, was what character, strength, or value do you have that would support these insights that you've had, right? I wouldn't necessarily say it exactly like that every single time. It isn't like check. But in different conversations, it seems really important. And the character strengths might have shown up earlier in a conversation where I might have asked, what strengths do you have that really are showing up here in this situation? And then it might have come back later again. Like you mentioned perseverance, like she didn't, but if she had, it might have been like, how does that benefit this goal of moving towards this practice, right? So it could show up in any number of ways to have those things show up. But what we're doing is we're drawing on the wisdom of the client, right? Did you guys notice the sort of the container of a conversation? Did you notice the different competencies show up in the conversation? Did it feel like a checklist, or did it feel like I was having a conversation, like we were having a conversation? Right. Yeah. I'm seeing nodding heads, so I'm assuming that's a
Yeah,
yeah.
this is Suzanne. It seemed very natural, and one of the things that I noted in watching you is you really just remained curious, almost curious in a playful way, very engaged, and then just followed the client, both whether it was something she said that you picked up on,
Mhm.
or a change in her face or body language, and you just followed each one of them, whatever detour it took them, but it was in a very light, curious way.
Yeah, not a lot of attachment to, and that's one of the things too. I think there was one point where I asked a question, and I am, unfortunately, this is one of my learning edges, my growth edges that I continue to work on, is I can make a very complicated question. It's just a thing I do. And so I really try and work on making them more concise and clear. Yet when a client says to me, "Did you mean da 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 da?" I'll be like, "Mm-hmm," because that's what they heard. And so I'm like, that's fine, right? Like, we'll just see where that takes us. I'm not going to get into no, what I really meant to say was, and then I take over the space, right? I just let it go. The other thing, and Nina didn't do this, that I noticed, she may have, and I just didn't notice it, but I really listen hard for when the client asks a question. And I'm like, yes, that's a really important question to explore. What is that question, right? When clients offer you a question, listen. Listen.
I have a comment. This is Claire. I find it challenging when clients say that they don't know. Mm-hmm. And Nina did that at least once. And I would love to re-listen to see how you got around that and how you then brought her to some place of knowing. So I thought that stood out to me, and you did it. I don't know exactly how you did it, but that stood out for me.
Yeah. There's a part of me that, well, if you did know, what would it be, right? And people just want to smack you if you do that.
Exactly.
Don't do that.
Exactly. It's like the typical coaching question. If you did know, what would that be? Yeah.
Yeah, if you did know, what would that be?
And so how did you do that? How did you finesse that?
I'd have to go back and listen to the recording also. And I do believe the recording will be available to you guys because they are recording it. So Keely's nodding her head yes. I'm not exactly sure. I think maybe what I did was I took a different word that she had used, or I maybe shared an observation, and I think I asked permission. May I share, an awareness or an insight or an observation that I'm having? And I wonder if that might have something to do with it. So instead of being focused on the I don't know, to that point of positive versus negative attractor, right? Like where our focus is going to be. I think what I did was I said, I'm wondering, and I don't remember exactly where this happened, so I could be just like talking smack right now, but I believe that it had something to do with that kind of the underlying confidence that I was curious about, right? That had shown up, and like, what would shift if you could trust that it didn't have to be perfect? Like, and that narrative that she had of her own voice telling her, it's not good enough, it's not perfect enough, and those things, right? So being curious there led to her then in a different direction. I wasn't leading her, because she had said these things and she could have said, no, that doesn't feel right to me at all. Like that doesn't have anything to do with it. I think I asked, how does that land on you, or something to that effect, right? And then it's like, yeah, I definitely think that has something to do with it. And so then what would be the step into that feeling much more confident with it not having to be perfect? And so now we're not focused on what she doesn't know. Instead, we're asking questions and being curious in another way towards what she does know.
Right? Good, thank you.
Yeah. And again, since I was there and talking, I wasn't keeping notes of my questions, so I could be completely wrong about what I did. Anything else that you guys noticed?
Yeah, well, I like to, but first of all, thank you, Lyssa and Nina. It was wonderful to watch that, and I was like attracted to, to your curiosity and to your sense of humor. It's like you are a PR machine generator. See, it's like, and from there you generate a kind of trust and safety environment. Incredible. And I have a question related to that. So if PA is so important, but sense of humor, it's not recognized as a competency. See what I mean? Or it's is, I mean, if you use sense of humor as you did,
So
someone is checking the competencies, is something that will be recognized or just something that you have?
no, so
I
it
don't know.
actually is recognized under trust and safety. The fact
Uh-huh.
that both of us could be laughing and enjoying each other, that becomes that sense of cultivating trust and safety, because people don't laugh like they don't laugh naturally if they don't have a sense of they're safe, right? It may start off as nervous laughter, but at some point, because I'm like, oh, there's that energy of the smile and the laughter, right? Which confirms that that is so welcome into the space, right? Which then invites the client to bring more of that. So I think that for me, I know when I'm listening to coaching calls, when the client and the coach really there's a synchronicity to their humor and the laughter and the hearing the client's humor and being led by it, definitely is a trust and safety component.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to just share my screen real quick because I do have a couple more slides I want to share with you just quickly. But really this, listening actively, listening deeply is really being curious, right? And being willing to be taught by your client. You do not actually have to be the expert. You do not need to be the expert. The client actually is the expert. Noticing these emotional shifts, these nonverbal cues, the facial expressions, the what's happening when you lighten up, like what are you hearing in your own self? Using their words, their tone, their body language, and noticing these things, but also asking them for meaning. What does that mean to you? Being willing to be direct when you notice a theme or a pattern, or you've got a curiosity. You don't need to try and like lead them to a conclusion of anything. You can just be transparent and like, I'm noticing this. Does this have anything to do with what's showing up for you? It can be completely transparent because that puts the client at choice to go yes, no, maybe. Right? They are at choice to determine if that's useful or not. And then allowing space and silence. We do not need to rush to fill in those silent moments. And I would encourage all of you to look at the growing and coaching mindset because I think it's just really recognizing that our clients are whole, capable, resourceful, creative. If I hold that belief at my core, then even when a client says, I don't really know, I can be like, well, I other things. So let's start exploring in other ways until we get to the place where the sense of possibility shows up for them, right? That they see that possibility and name it for themselves. I highly recommend developing a reflective practice in your coaching. Obviously I'm a mentor coach, so that's one way of being reflective in your own coaching, getting coaching supervision. I have a coach supervisor. I get supervision once a month with my own coaching. I think it is highly important that we have these places where we're reflecting on what's coming up for us. When we have a client that is like really forcing us to grow, or that we're getting hooked by, or we're kind of feel like we're spinning round and round with, having coaching supervision is so useful for things like that. And also, one of the things that I do a lot for myself too, is I will record coaching conversations and I will get a transcript done and I will go through and I will look at what the client said. And then I will look at what I asked, and I may write multiple different questions that might have been more useful to start practicing getting my head into a space of slowing down to ask the more useful question. I'm not perfect at it, but that's definitely a self-reflective process that I go through often. And then again, there's this piece also like using your intuition to the benefit of the client. honestly, that's a big part of my asking, you know, may I share this observation that I'm noticing and I'm wondering if this is relevant to you, is I'm sharing an intuition that I have where my curiosity is informed by my experience. And I can ask the question, and the client is always at choice to decide for themselves. So I will share this with you. I have mentor coaching groups, but please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website. And also, I'm going to put into the chat these slides. Oftentimes people are like, I'd love to have a copy of the slides. And the way that I do that is I have a website where you can go and get them. I also give you another coaching demonstration for free there so that you can have a chance to listen to another coaching conversation. So if you're interested in the slides, you can go to the courses.lyssadeHart.com, art and science of the neuroscience of coaching. And then that's my LinkedIn. If you want to connect up with me, just let me know that we met here in South Florida. And I think I've taken up all of the time that I have, and Yolanda is probably wishing I would be quiet so she could jump in there. So I'm going to be quiet now. But thank you so much for having me, you guys.
Thank you, Lyssa. We enjoyed it thoroughly, and I'm sure that everybody here will be leaving with a smile. And you know, there are not opportunities to do this that often, and so having you doing the demo was a gift, and I appreciate it immensely.